Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gabon 24 for another version of the interview. With us on set of this program, Mrs. Lombe Kasonde. She is a health specialist and team leader within the World Bank. Hello, madam, and welcome to Gabon 24.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Okay, so quickly, let's go. I would ask you the first question. Can you tell us more about the national pharmaceutical regulatory system?
Okay, let me start by saying that medicines are a core part of the health system.
Okay.
There are three major expenses in the health system. Our main goal is to achieve universal health coverage. And to get to there, we need three things.
Okay.
One is infrastructure, two is health workers, and three, medicines. This is to put it broadly and to put it simply. Those are the three major expenses.
Okay.
So now on the medicines part, it's important to regulate them. You want to make sure that you have quality medicines accessible to the entire population. So for quality medicines, you need a strong regulatory system. Okay. There are 9 regulatory functions that we're working towards. We're helping countries to strengthen their regulatory systems to meet those 9 functions.
What is the policy implemented by by countries?
Okay, so the policy would be those 9 functions. So one would be marketing authorizations. That's part of a regulatory system. 2 would be inspections. That's part of a regulatory system. You have market surveillance. You have imports, and then control of vaccines as well. So there are different functions that have been set by WHO, the World Health Organization. And so we're helping countries to meet those indicators.
Okay, so why is it important to regulate the sector?
Well, as I said when I started, medicines are one of the most important inputs for a health system. And medicines are purchased in 2 ways. One can be in the public sector, so using public financing from the government. And then secondly, people might purchase their medicines themselves, so out-of-pocket expenditure. And out-of-pocket expenditure can lead the population, one, into poverty, and then secondly, if the medicines are not of good quality, you're increasing the mortality and morbidity of your populations.
Wow.
So you're making them spend money unnecessarily. That would be the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario, the outcomes might actually be death or morbidity, so not the same quality of life that you had before. It's very critical to regulate medicines in the country.
Very critical, but is that the overview you just gave us, or you can maybe a more broadened overview of the system?
Well, a regulatory system is normally, it can be 2 things. It can be under the Ministry of Health, or it can be an autonomous agency. So in Gabon, you actually have both. The agency is autonomous, but it's also under the Ministry of Health. In other countries, like in Côte d'Ivoire, you have an independent autonomous agency. In the DRC, they're also moving towards an independent autonomous agency. And the agency has very clear functions that it has to, a very clear mandate that it has to fulfill in the country. So what we're doing, for instance, the reason I'm here in Gabon this week is countries with the CEMAC countries, the 6 countries for the Central African region, came together to self-evaluate their regulatory systems. It's an auto-evaluation. They're using a tool called the Global Benchmarking Tool that was developed by WHO. And so they go through each of the regulatory functions. There are 9 regulatory functions. The last one is on vaccines. So because Africa doesn't produce vaccines as much, we don't really focus on the 9th function, but we focus on the first 8, so like the marketing authorizations that I mentioned, the market surveillance that I mentioned. So the countries were going through each function and self-evaluating how they're performing. And it's a score from 1 to 4. So we are trying to help countries get to level 4 or even level 3. Level 3 shows that you're a mature regulatory agency and you're able to safeguard your medicines market. So that's what we're doing here this week. We're supporting OSEAC and the WHO and, of course, the country governments to do their self-evaluations. And it also, from the evaluation, they develop institutional development plans, which are costed, and it gives us an indication of how much money we need to invest to get countries to a mature regulatory system.
Great, it's a whole big stuff.
It's very, it's big.
My God. You mentioned levels that actually I would love to ask, though you're not coming from Gabon. What is the level? Is it level 3 for Gabon or 4 or 2?
It will be. It will be. But to be honest, there's only one African country that is at a level 3. So the highest in Africa is a level 3, and that's Tanzania. It achieved level 3 in 2019. So we're working very closely with countries through the health sector to get them to strengthen their regulatory systems to move towards at least a level 3. About 50% of countries at a level 1 or 2, and the rest are at a level 3 or 4. But this is countries globally, so this includes Western countries, the US, Europe and Japan and so on. So most countries in Africa are at a level 1 and 2. But from, if I go back to the workshop again, there was really a lot of commitment and sort of energy put into these self-evaluations. So we're going to work very closely with the countries to help them move towards level 2 if they're at a level 1, and then level 3 if they're below that. And I think we will get there. We've seen a very different dynamic.
Let's hope Gabon will get to level 3
Oh, definitely. I'm very confident.
Let us cross our fingers.
No,
it's important for our country to get to level 3, 4, and upward.
I'm very confident that Gabon is going to get to a level 3 and upwards because the leadership at the Medicines Regulatory Authority has really been strong, and we've really seen the commitment. We've seen very detailed work plans, costed work plans. So we want to support through the CEMAC, through the sub-regional organizations. We really want to support Gabon to help it achieve its goals because we've seen the momentum that has been gained.
Great. I wish to ask you, what happens to the unsold drugs?
Unsold drugs. So unfortunately, unsold drugs can end up obviously in the wrong hands, and they can end up in illicit markets, so not following the official channels for the sale of medicines. What should happen is any drug that has passed its expiry date should be incinerated. But we've found situations where, first of all, a drug has an economic value, so it's very difficult for people to let go of that commodity. And we've found situations where countries don't have enough incinerators, so they're not able to burn their drugs. So we're also investing in those kinds of inputs to make sure that procedures are being followed. There are very strict procedures on what to do with drugs that have expired and how to dispose of unused supplies.
Wow, I'm learning a lot from you. So I mean, what about how to deal with self-medication at home?
Self-medication is definitely a very big challenge. The pharmaceutical sector and pharmacies specifically, unfortunately, are a very easy entry point into health services. So we're not taking advantage of pharmacists as strongly as we could. People are ending up going to pharmacies and prescribing or requesting their own medicines, so they're auto-medicating based on their own evaluation of their symptoms. And this is a big challenge. There's an overuse of antimicrobials through this, and this is creating antimicrobial resistance. So once you have antimicrobial resistance, it means you have to move on to the next line of drugs. So if you're resistant to first line of treatment, you have to move to second line. And if you become resistant to second line, you have to move to third line. And most of our countries don't have access to third line treatment. Even if countries do have access, sometimes there are just no other options. There aren't any antimicrobials that have been developed for antimicrobial resistant infections. So it becomes a challenge where you're first of all wasting resources. You're medicating yourself, meaning you're not even necessarily treating the actual disease that you have. And then you're creating a problem for the world. This is a global antimicrobial resistance is a global problem. So it's something that we really need to educate our populations about. Your entry point to the health service is the health facility. Wow. And the pharmacy is providing a service. So the service really depends on what your doctor or your prescribing nurse has given you, and you have to use that as your starting point. So it means we also have to strengthen our health system to encourage people to have access to quality health services and to use them.
A real big challenge for African countries, actually. But I will ask you, what industries supply pharmacies in Africa?
So there are different types of ways pharmacies are supplied. It can be directly from a manufacturer, or it can be through a wholesaler or distributor. All of them, of course, have to be licensed, and the drugs have to be authorized. They have to have a marketing authorization to be sold in that country. So these are the formal channels for supplying medicines. There are, of course, informal channels, and this is another reason why we're working on regulation, is to combat the proliferation of informal channels. We're really focusing on getting pharmacies to be supplied by manufacturers directly or by wholesalers and distributors that have been accredited.
Yeah, actually, I would ask, what is the contribution of major international institutions such as World Bank, World Health Organization in this regulation at national level, and how is collaboration going?
So I can speak to my own organization, the World Bank. In the health sector, more globally, we have about $10 billion in investments in health, and that includes the whole health sector, and it includes the regulatory system. We haven't disaggregated specifically for regulatory systems, but in strengthening the health system, we're also focusing on regulation. This is through lending directly to countries and also lending through regional bodies. And then through trust funds as well. So the work that we've been doing this week in Gabon was actually financed through what we call a trust fund. So multiple donors have invested in this trust fund. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, DFID in the UK, have invested in this trust fund, and that we've been managing since 2014. It's the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization project that we've been co-financing with these institutions and managing the trust fund. So there's no specific disaggregation as such on regulatory systems, but it comes as a package of services for the health sector more broadly.
We're moving close to the end of our program, but I would like to ask do you have any last word to our viewers, because we know we are consumers of these drugs, and we hope we can have quality drugs in Africa maybe anytime soon. But before it happens, how can they behave towards these fake medicines or stuff like that, drugs? What is your last word, actually? What is your last word to the viewers?
I think having programs like this is really important to educate the public and to keep the conversation going about the importance of quality medicines. And it's us, the consumers, who can really enforce or support the regulatory system by demanding quality medicines, by using formal channels to access our medicines, and to follow health procedures, so not to auto-medicate, but to use the health services as it is intended, and really to demand quality medicines from our countries. And I have no doubt that we're going to get there. There's a lot of work to be done. It's very complex, but we have a huge body of intellect and capacity, so we're going to get there.
We thank you so much. It's been helpful, your presence here. We've learned a lot from you, and we hope to see you, why not, for a second chance. And thank you. You've been watching Gabon 24. This has been the interview. I've been with Mrs. Lombe Kasonde. Lombe Kasonde, I recall, she is a health specialist and team leader at the World Bank.
Thank you very much.
We hope to see you anytime soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.